Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the PMA-CIBC Summit Series. Thank you to everyone in the audience today and across the industry for such strong support to keep our program fresh with new topics and discussions each month. Today's session will wrap up the third season of our program, and we're already planning for our fourth year, which will be coming out in the new year, so look out for that. If you're joining us on any of our social media platforms or our YouTube channel, please subscribe to the channel and also hit that like button. Please also get in touch with us with content suggestions and topics you'd like us to explore. But before we begin with our program, we acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse nations, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land, and by doing so, we give our respect to its first inhabitants. And because our audience is national, if you're joining us from outside the Toronto area, I encourage you to learn more about the traditional territories where you live, learn, and work. Again, my name's Chris Markovic, and on behalf of PMA Brethour, CIBC, our title sponsor, and our media partner, McOuat, we are thrilled to have you all join us today. Today, we have our friends and supporters from CIBC, Benjamin Tal and Catherine Judge from CIBC Capital Markets, who will give us their impressions and insights on the economic landscape and how it translates to your business today. I'm also excited to introduce Lianne McOuat, who's been with us since day one on this program as our media and production partners. Lianne will start off our session this morning with a high-level discussion on new home and development marketing in today's climate. And she'll give you some tips and tricks along the way, so get ready to take some notes. Then we'll bring in Catherine and Ben, who will sit with Andy, and hopefully we'll be able to take some questions at the end. So over to you, Lianne. Thank you for joining us.
Morning, everyone. I'm so used to being behind the scenes, so it's strange to be in front of the camera. So bear with me as I'm handling the production board and also sharing slides and speaking to you today. Hopefully I don't mess up. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lianne McOuat, and our agency, McOuat Partnership, is proud to be celebrating 50 years in business next year in 2023. This means that our company has been through a lot of market ups and downs, and we have a deep well of experience in all real estate verticals. I actually worked on my first project in 1992. So 2022, I celebrated 30 years in the industry. And I earned my stripes in the 1990s, those wild days that were very tough in the market. It was so difficult to sell a home. Some of you on the call may remember what that was like. It felt like every week we were coming up with new product, new promotions, new ideas for how to entice people to visit our sales offices. And it was actually a really exciting time to come of age in the industry, even though it was really tough. So when Chris and Andy and I were talking about me getting a chance to come on and talk to you today, we talked about, tough market tips and how some of our experience over the years and some tips for builders today. So I am going to share my presentation. There we go. Today, I'm going to spend about 10 minutes going through some quick, tough market tips for builders with advice on a whole bunch of areas. I just wanted to open and give you a quick primer on McOuat Partnership and what it is that we do. We are a strategic GTA-based marketing firm specializing in the real estate vertical, including low-rise, mid-rise, high-rise, multifamily, resort and hospitality, student housing, retirement residences, and real estate agents, as well as real estate financing companies. As I said before, 50 years of experience next year. We've had an incredible opportunity to work on over 3,000 communities across North America and the Caribbean. We're currently handling around 80 clients. We are a family legacy business. My father, Chuck McOuat, founded the firm in 1973, and I work with my 4 brothers and sisters. We are all working together in partnership, and we each lead a different area of expertise. We are a full service advertising agency with about 40 plus staff, some for 20 years and more. And we have in-house creative branding, digital, social, video, photography, renderings, touchscreens, public relations, public affairs, and interior design divisions. And we even have our own podcast studio. So today I wanted to separate our advice into 4 different builder categories. The first is advice for builders that are in the have to sell position. These are builders that have sold 30 to 50% of their project, but they need to get to 70% to obtain their construction financing by a specific date. Next is builders who are in tempo sales, sometimes call them soft sell. These are builders who have launched this summer or fall, and they've sold very few homes, but they need to continue selling in order to meet their construction and financing goals to start building in spring and summer of 2023. Next is builders who are currently on hold. There are lots of those. They started lead generation earlier this year. They have a database, but they put their project on hold while they try to decide when to launch. And then the last category are builders that are in launch planning mode. They are planning to launch for sales next year. They're not sure when. They haven't started any lead generation and they're in the product development phase. So let's start with those have to sell builders. First of all, we want to give some advice that my dad taught me: package up, never price down. You really don't want to risk the first 50% of your sales not closing. So if you can avoid it, don't cut your prices. Creating interesting incentive packages that are limited time offers to essentially get the price down without upsetting existing buyers is a much better idea. And if you offer them on specific lots or model types that you haven't sold before, this is going to lower the risk a lot. Next is don't give up. It is not the time to hide under a rock. You need to advertise, you need to generate leads. We're generating leads on maybe 40 projects right now, and they are coming in every day. You need to treat them like gold though. So you've got to follow up, and some more on that later. Next is you need to look to new markets. You are selling now to people who are not investing and speculating. These are people who need a home. They don't just want a home. Thank God, every day there's new people coming into the market. They're having a baby, they're getting a divorce. That's 2 homes. They just got an inheritance, they're relocating for a new job, or they're downsizing empty nesters. So look to those new markets and target them. Next, you want to create urgency and desire. Tell a compelling story to potential buyers targeting both the magical and the logical side of their brains, and convince people to buy within a short time frame. Marketing is the concept, the prospect of creating desire. More advice for those have to sell builders. Direct mail can be a really great tool if you have very specific trends on the neighborhoods or the buildings where your sales have come from. So analyze those geographic trends and consider very cost-effective flyers. Next, consider a referral program. For these builders, you already have 50 or 100 buyers. Offer them a compelling bonus to refer their friends. Ideally, something that both parties get, even an experience that they can do together instead of just cash. How about a trip to New York for both of them that they can do together? Next, bring out those objections. If you aren't talking at your sales and marketing meetings every week about those objections, it's your sales team isn't doing a good job. You've got to address them, have the sales teams bring them out. And if you see strong trends, don't be slow to address them. And that's the last point for these have to sell builders. In the 90s, working with Green Park, my dad always said, Carla would say, don't sit on a problem. Don't be slow to consider all of your options. Sometimes there's hard decisions to be made, and we've done drastic things before when we had to sell, even redlining site plans or totally going back to the drawing board for future phases. Next is advice for those tempo sales builders in the soft sell mode. They've opened, they need to make their sales by next spring, summer, but they're not in the same have to sell mode. So for them, look at your product. Is it satisfying your customers' needs? And what opportunities do you have to bring in new product? A lot of us are doing this right now. Maybe you look at where there's product openings. Could you do with a smaller house? Or maybe look at your most popular seller and how can you create alternative versions of that home? Maybe a silver series with a lower Schedule A. Yes, it makes construction more complicated, but you need the homes to build, so consider all of your options when you're looking at your product. Next, dive into your database. Analyze, analyze, analyze. And now is the time to bring in a CRM if you do not have one. It can really help you bring the cream of your database to the top of the list. Don't forget about email marketing. And when you're sending emails, use your email marketing to qualify. So ask questions in your email, give them the right things to click on, and then download the list of who clicked, give it to your sales team for personal follow-up. And when they're doing those personal follow-ups, a great tip is to ask a question even in the subject line. A great one is, still looking for a new home? That's definitely going to get them to open it up and start a conversation with personal outreach. Last for the tempo sales builders is brokers. A necessary evil, but they are our army, and you as the builder are the general. So give them every tool that they need. Control your brand as much as you can and engage them as much as possible, and then let that army loose to fight your war, to sell your product. How about those projects that are on hold right now? There are a bunch of them, we know this. So what can you do now in the meantime? Get curious, hold an online or an in-person focus group. We do these all the time. We facilitate them, national homes, we do a ton of them. We can get so much good qualitative and quantitative data out of these sessions. So get people together, create a survey, and just get curious about the people on your list and what you can do to meet their needs. Next is nurture and educate those leads. You want to stay top of mind, but don't waste their time. Create ebooks, videos, anything to educate them while they're waiting for you to come to the market. Get them primed. Next is stay on top of the competition. You want to watch very closely what your closest competitors are doing, both right and wrong, and watch their sales, not just what they're listed at. So try some mystery shopping. And finally, be ready. You want to be ready to pounce the second that you see your regional market come alive. So be sure you have all your materials ready and your database primed so you can open at a moment's notice. Next is those builders that are in launch planning mode right now. First off, don't be boring. The most successful projects today, and Andy's going to talk about a lot of them, there's some great success stories, they are not the boring ones. So give your marketing an exciting edge with an incredible, never seen before incentive like amazing deposit programs or rate buy down offers. Look at the pain points of your customer. You really need to dive deep to understand your target market. So deposits, monthly payment programs, those are their main pain points, but what other pains do they have and how can you address it? Next is giving your customers peace of mind. Security and peace of mind are the most important things on their mind. So what can you do to give the customer security? Rate buy downs, as I mentioned, equalize payments, or those dreaded 2017 price guarantees, might they be coming back? We may have to do that. Next is getting customer testimonials. It's a great time to talk to your happy existing customers, written or video, and leverage those across all of your channels. Credibility is key. There are buyers that are nervous about projects getting canceled. So if you're an experienced builder, focus on your completed projects. And if you're a newer builder, hire consultants with deep experience that you can leverage. There's a lot of amazing sales companies and agencies with 25, 30, 50 years of experience, and we have a lot of tricks in the bag, absolutely, that we can dive into. Next is look at your 6 Ps: price, product, place, people, promotion, and process. Spend time carefully looking at each of these 6 Ps of marketing to make sure that you have a yes check mark for each one of these areas. And that's a yes check mark on the buyer's checklist. And finally, use this time wisely. When you're not in crazy launch mode like we've been for a number of years, it is a good time to look at your corporate branding, your websites, shoring up your customer experience and customer care programs, and get ready to be busy again, which we know it will be. Lastly, for many years, a lot of builders have focused their marketing on the logical reasons to buy a home or a condo. Prices are going up, invest, 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 very much targeting the logical side of the brain. But most people make decisions based on their emotions. So in a market where prices are often not going up due to these rising interest rates, it's a good time to remind ourselves that there are many emotional reasons why people buy. As a seller, if you can tap into the emotional reason for the buyer, then we can connect the property to their underlying reason and tap into a different part of their brain. So what emotions can we tap into in our marketing efforts? Fear, always a good one. Altruism, love, pride, shame, and greed. That's the one we've been doing the last couple of years, but maybe there's buyers, they're buying because they want to go into a different school district for their child, or they want to keep up with the Joneses and they're focusing on that aspirational side. Every time you look at a project or a marketing piece, figure out which emotional reason it is tapping into. So that is it for me today. I think it was 10 minutes, I'm not sure. Check out our website, Shoemakers Children Wear No Shoes. We don't update it often enough. I got to add that to my to-do list. So thank you so much, Andy and Chris, for allowing me to give some quick advice to the viewers today. And I'm really looking forward to hearing Andy's market update, which is coming up next. Over to you, Andy.
Well, thank you, Lianne. I am a, flower child from the 60s. So I'm tapping into love on your chart there. I'm surely tapping into love. I thought that was just perfect. I'm going to speak to, for a few minutes, and give you some reaction to what's been happening in this marketplace. And it's pretty much all good news. Now, you might expect that from me. It's not Pollyanna, but it is, in fact, some remarkable trend lines unfolding. We had to laugh here around the office last week, October 26th, or now a couple weeks, when the Bank of Canada only went up 50 basis points only. And we were excited about that because our whole expectation level, our sense of where this rate game was going had been, the rapidity of change had been so dramatic that we were contemplating 50, not 50, but 75, even another 100 basis points. And it only went up 50. We all jumped for joy around this office. And we thought, and it'll be a good question for Ben and Catherine, Judge, if in fact, is this part of a trend line now where the Bank of Canada appears to be taking its foot off the accelerator slightly? And can we expect more modest movement of rates going forward? We know we're going to be hit some more in December the 6th and in early Q1 23, but will it be more modest? Or was this just a simple head fake and we're into, the pressure to move inflation is so entrenched that the Bank of Canada and the Federal Reserve in the US will continue with a rapid rise in rates. Article in the Wall Street Journal this morning suggesting the Federal Reserve in the US is also contemplating backing it off a little bit. So that's a kind of an interesting trend line and a very positive one for us in our industry, because it's not so much the level of rate as the rapidity of change that impacts the consumer. This is the fastest we've seen rates in decades. It's a higher level right at the moment than the millennial crowd has seen since the early 2000s. So we're 20 years of rates below 6%. And we're now hovering around that level right now on the discount rate from CIBC this morning at 5.5%, and the posted rate at 6.5. If I add the joy of the stress test, the MQR, that's an extra 2 points. So the challenge we have is qualifying. How do I qualify people? That is really, really the stress point that we're facing at this moment. I'll touch on that in a second. But if in fact we get some stability of rate change, the market will adjust to that. Remember, during the 90s, the average 3-year rate was 11.75%, 11.75%, double what we're talking about today. And I was the first one on my block in 1981 to have a 21.5% mortgage, for all of you people feeling stressed out by 5.5. So it's not so much the level, but the stability. So stability of rate over time will cause an adjustment of the consumer. And that's, I think, upon us. I think that'll be a question I'll throw back to Ben and Catherine. Is this upon us? Is that the right signal? The other signal is the resale market. My goodness, 4 months of stability, 4 months, July, August, September, October, sales identical, a small, slight delta movement. Price identical, flat, didn't move up or down by more than 1%. Listings flat, holding. Supply holding, in fact, supply holding at around 13,000 units might be considered a little on the high side historically. We need to get to 25,000 for a market that's in real balance or turns into a buyer's market. We don't think that's going there. It's going to come up through the spring of next year and might hit as high as 17 or 18,000. But at the moment, it's very, very stable. So now you've had 4 months of stability. This is really quite remarkable. And stability really is the key factor for a consumer saying, okay, the bottom, the correction, the adjustment has been reached. And it's now feeling more comfortable about getting back into the market. This is an amazing announcement of a week ago on the federal government's part to increase immigration to 500,000 a year. 500,000, 1.4 million through 2025. One might argue is another good question for our economists in a moment. Is this a signal that is something that we might consider to be backing off on when demand levels have pulled back to such an extreme? Do you actually need to keep filling the bathtub when I can't get them through the other end of the drain and it's overflowing? So is immigration at 500,000 the right thing to do? Well, it is in the long term. We certainly need it on a regular basis. Remember now, 35% is coming to the GTA. That's 175,000 new immigrants every year. That's potentially 60,000 to 70,000 new households. Goodness gracious, that's just absolutely remarkable. And so what we're facing now is this continuing growth, which is really, really powerful. Supply. The announcements from Bill C-23 is absolutely remarkable. It's awesome. It's the first time I think we've seen in it. I can't remember a government so tuned to the supply issue and tackling it in such a major way. This is a great breakthrough. And there will be lots of discussions from the points of Greenbelt to the points of MZOs and other elements that the province will almost impactfully on municipalities. But we'll get through this. But to have the attention to supply is actually critical. It's going to take some time. It will take till 2025 to turn this ship around in the harbor. And we got 150,000 a year over the next 10 years as target, 1.5 million houses to build. What a remarkable achievement that would be. And what a place to do business. I mean, here we are in the GTA. I want to just point out one other moment of importance and tell you that the data I was looking at the other day showed how many student visas we have here in the country. 750,000 for 2022, 621 last year. That's just unbelievable. 250,000 of that here in Ontario. They're all exempt, by the way, as long as they're applying for permanent residency at some point from the foreign buyers restriction Gen 1 and from the tax levels that are placed on foreign buyers. The student can be exempt from that. So there's an underlying pressure and great news, actually, of how to get at that student in our midst. Now, the adjustment for new housing ratchets down much slower than resale. resale, you have to look at sort of a tale of two cities here: high rise, low rise, and location, because it's much different. Each neighborhood is totally different, and high rise was never nearly as frothy as low rise. So just be careful in using the averages. But the news story is adjustment is Mattamy in Milton, and 72 deals in a week. Deco in Pickering, the Gasperset, 42 deals on the weekend. Riocan coming in with the Marlin Springs and City Center with a podium product at $1,200 a foot, and getting just a tremendous uptake in their early allocations. And Tridel at Lakeview with 210 sales in the last 30 days with our breakthrough prices at around $1,300 a foot. So the adjustments have been on some of the things that Lianne was talking about earlier: deposit structure, price points, specifications, new designs, amenity packaging is quite dramatic. And they found the hot button in the way it went. There's an important signal coming up for us, and that's December 15th. I want you to all write your member of parliament and federally, and Krista Freeland in particular, Minister of Finance, who meets with the Bank of Canada and the Department of Finance on December the 15th and reviews the MQR, the mortgage qualifying rate stress test. We need that to be suspended. It is in a position right now where it's piling on, it's redundant, and it would go a long way to help our industry into the first quarter of 23 when it's being crushed by this qualifying rate. So those are some of your good news stories that are out there. I'm going to now turn it back to Chris, who will introduce Ben, who's here. Thank you, Ben. So glad you were able to join us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Way you go. I think you just jump on and way you go. I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay. Perfect.
Chris. Sorry, Chris.
Okay. So I can go, yeah?
Go.
Okay. Yeah, I can go, you know.
Go.
Listen, a lot to talk about. And I listened to what you said, and it's very refreshing, very interesting angle. And I will discuss some of the points that you made. Totally agree with many of your points. First of all, however, we have to discuss the elephant in the room. So I'm going to divide my remarks into three parts. The first part will be about inflation. The second part will be about inflation. And the third part will be about inflation. Because inflation is everywhere. And if you want to know where this housing market is going, you have to have a narrative about inflation. And after talking about inflation for half an hour, I will tell you that it's really not about inflation. It's about, and that's extremely important to understand, it's about the cost of bringing inflation down to 2%. The Bank of Canada, the Fed, the ECB in Europe, they established their reputation over the past 30 years as inflation fighters. They are not going to toss it away. You give the Bank of Canada two options. One is inflation, the other is a recession. They will go with a recession any day. That's something that we have to understand. And when it comes to inflation, they really don't care about the inflation rate that you read in newspapers. What they care about is inflation expectations. And those expectations are extremely important. And the difference between today and the 1970s is the fact that expectations back then were rising. So wages were rising as quickly as prices, and that's fed the process. So far, inflation expectations are relatively subdued, and that's the fight. The fight is to make sure that those expectations are not rising. Now, let's discuss those expectations for a second. 80% of those expectations are based on four prices alone. The price of bread, the price of milk, of course, the price of beer, and gasoline prices. Four prices, 80%. One more thing, and that's not a joke. We know from surveys that social media is considered to be the most credible source of information about inflation. Social media. So the Bank of Canada is trying to figure out what we think about inflation, and we are influenced by social media, which means that the Bank of Canada is influenced by social media. But there's good news. The good news, and very good news in fact, The good news is that the Bank of Canada has a Twitter account. The bad news is that nobody is following them. The point that I'm making is that the Bank of Canada cannot tweet its way out of inflation. And therefore, what I suggest is that they have to be militant. You discussed earlier, Andy, the Bank of Canada going with only 50. The market gave the Bank of Canada a green light to go 75. They went 50. That's amazing. That's an act of bravery. The question is why? Because we know that every housing market crash, every economic recession was helped, if not caused, by monetary policy error in which central bankers raise interest rates way too much. Why? Because as we discussed in our previous conversation, inflation is a lagging indicator. Inflation peaks 6 months after the beginning of a recession. So inflation is a lagging indicator, but show me the central banker that will have the guts to stop raising interest rates when inflation is still elevated. And the Bank of Canada they're basically what they're telling us. They're telling us we do not want to overshoot. That's why we went 50. It doesn't mean that they're going to stop now, they will not. But now they're starting to think baby steps as opposed to 100 basis points. Now, with the Fed, the situation is the same. However, the Fed is much more militant in its language. Why? Because they have to. You cannot tweet your way out of inflation, so you have to show us, and you have to use very strong language. So the Fed is very aggressive in its language. It doesn't mean that this language will be translated into action. So that's the story. Now, very, very important. I think that there are some interesting developments in inflation. At any point in time, we have two sources of inflation. We have demand-driven inflation and supply-driven inflation. Now, the issue is that the Bank of Canada can talk about inflation until they are blue in the face. If the inflation is coming from the supply side of the economy, they cannot do anything about it. And that's actually how you overshoot, because you raise interest rates, nothing happens, you raise again. Nothing happens, you raise again, and you overshoot. Now, what's interesting is that the share of inflation that is coming from supply is starting to go down because of significant improvement in supply chain. We know now that freight activity is almost back to normal. Shipping cost is down dramatically. Today, you have 20% more truck drivers in the US than before the crisis. So the US Fed index of supply chain headaches, if you wish, is down dramatically, which is good news. Why? Because the lower the contribution of supply to inflation, the more effective the Bank of Canada is. Because everything is domestic, you can do something about it, and the risk of overshooting is actually going down. That's really good news. And that's why every day I follow that index of supply chain. Remember, supply chain is 50% of inflation, 50%. So you eliminate that, or you eliminate a big part of it, and you really eliminate 3-4% of inflation, you stuck with 3% that domestic interest rates can deal with. That's more or less where we are, and the trajectory is very clear now. So I'm very optimistic about the ability of the Bank of Canada and the global economy to reduce inflation to about 4%, 3.5% relatively quickly over the next few quarters. And then we'll see what the Bank of Canada can do in terms of raising interest rates. One more factor, which is really important, is the labor market, because wages have been rising a little bit, but they're not rising quickly enough to compensate for the increase in prices. Why? Because expectations are not rising. And we don't have the time to discuss the whole story regarding the labor market. But one thing we know, we have 1 million vacancies, 1 million vacancies. The question is, where is everybody? People say they're all at home watching soccer. Well, you know what? They are not at home watching soccer because they are actually in the market participating. Many things are happening, but one thing I will say, COVID is changing the structure of the market. All the jobs, basically 100% of jobs created since the beginning of COVID, all of them were university educated individuals. The people that are exiting the labor market on average are low pay, low education. So the people that are entering the labor market, high pay, high education, the people that are exiting low pay, low education, the share of low paying jobs going down. And that's a shortage that we see. And that's why there is pressure to raise their wages, but they are not going up. They're not going up because small businesses that employ most of those low wage individuals simply cannot afford it. So we are seeing something very interesting. Wages in the low segment of the market are still relatively subdued given the shortage of labor. Now, the hope and the prayer is that with the economy slowing down and we are entering a recession, but it will be a wannabe recession. What I mean by that, the damage to the labor market will not be very, very significant. The unemployment rate we expect will rise to 6.5%, which means that the economy will be shedding vacancies as opposed to shedding jobs. And that's something that will help the Bank of Canada to fight this inflation with relatively little damage. However, there is always the risk of overshooting. If for some reason something crazy happens, we get the news now from China that COVID is back there, you know the story. There are many things that can happen, Russia, and the supply segment of inflation does not continue to go down, and in fact reverse, then the Bank of Canada will have to do something about it because inflation is not improving to the 4% that we need it to improve. So what do? You raise again and you raise again and you go to 5.5%. That's a real recession. That's a recession that will damage the labor market in a very significant way, and of course the housing market. I will give this scenario 25 to 30% probability. The more reasonable scenario at this point is that the Bank of Canada will continue to go, but will stop, let's say, at 4.25. We are at 3.75 now, another 50 basis points, maybe by December. And maybe call it a day. There is a risk to go 4.50, okay, but let's say 4.25. So that's one aspect, the next few moves or the next move. Then the next question, which is extremely important, for how long? And by the way, Andy, I totally agree with your suggestion that what counts is not just the level, is the trajectory and how quickly interest rates are rising and the fog that they create. Absolutely right. I speak to many developers that tell me, what the only thing I need in terms of to build, I need to know the rate, not a rate that changes every 2 minutes. So that's important. So we say from 3.75 to 4.25 by December, let's say, just a reasonable guess. Then what do you do? When do you start cutting? I say not before late 2023, early 2024. Why? Because you want to make sure that inflation is dead before you cut interest rates. The reason why we had a double-dip recession in the 1980s is because of the fact that the authorities lower interest rates prematurely and cause another wave of inflation and therefore a recession. So they will try to make sure that inflation is dead before they cut. So let's say late 2023, early 2024. Then you cut. By how much? Remember, we started this saga at 1.75 overnight rate. We are going to 4.25, stay there for a while and then cut. To what? I say 3 to 75. Basically, more than a full percent higher than before. Why? Because we have 3 sources of inflation beneath. We have now deglobalization instead of globalization. That's more inflationary. We have just-in-case inventories replacing just-in-time inventory. That's inflationary. And now we have a labor market that is not inviting, a labor market that is not cheap and available. That's inflationary. So you have 3 forces of inflation. And in addition, all those environmental aspects, they're inflationary at the margin. So you have many inflationary forces beneath. The target of the Bank of Canada is 2%, remember. They're not going to change it anytime soon. So the target is the same. The forces are stronger. By definition, interest rates have to be higher to reach that target than before. So let's say 3 to 75 overnight rate after you cut interest rates and stabilize there. I think that's a reasonable working assumption if things go according to plan. The overshooting is definitely a risk, but at this point, this is our main case scenario. In this environment, I think that the housing market can do fine. I think it can do fine. Is the correction over? Not so sure. I think that we still have a few more months of a struggle. One thing that is helping prices, as you mentioned, Andy, is supply. This is the first correction in the housing market that supply did not rise. In fact, it's down. The first ever. Why? People are not selling, they don't want to sell, and they want to see when the fog clears, and then they will start selling. So there's no listing. That's protecting the market. Totally agree with you, Andy, as well, that the last thing you want to do is to look at the average price. The average price means nothing because it's a composition factor. You really want to look at the composite price, which is down 10%. Now, remember, over the past, during COVID, interest rates, the average price went up by 46%. The composite price went up close to 40%. We have seen a significant increase in prices. We all know the story. We saw a situation in which home buyers during COVID got the benefit of a recession vis-a-vis extremely low interest rates without the cost of a recession vis-a-vis a broadly based increase in the unemployment rate. We have never seen anything like that. That's the reason why prices went up so dramatically. So we borrowed activity from the future. There was a sense of urgency to get into the market. There was front-loading activity. We borrowed activity from the future, and the future has arrived. We are in the future. And that's good. The correction that we are seeing is a good thing. This is not a meltdown. This is not even a correction in the full meaning of the word. It is reallocation of activity over time. That's the way to look at the situation. You front-loaded activity, and now you are resting. And higher interest rates are helping you to rest. To me, that's very healthy. Now, the big question over the next year, what will happen to supply? Are we going to see people after interest rates stabilize starting to list because they're more comfortable and the market is now closer to, basically balanced conditions? Or are we going to see some stress sales, forced sales, because we know that some people will face a significant increase in their payments when they renew? We are talking about variable rate moving from 1.5 to 5 something percent. 5-year rate from 3% to 5.5%. That's significant. That's significant. So we might see some stress there. I estimate that roughly 22% of mortgages now, and that's important to know, 22% are now reaching the trigger rate in which they are basically all interest. Depends which bank you're dealing with. You have more or less flexibility here. CIBC, for example, is adding 5%. So the designated price is 1 or 5%. Other banks, not so much. So there will be a situation in which individuals will have to do something about it. Now, if you look at the pool of 22% that now are already in trigger rate zone, about 10% of them are accelerating payments. Namely, they're actually raising their interest payments and therefore reducing amortization. Only 3% at this point, only 3% of them, 3% of the 22% are selling. So far, there is no huge increase in supply due to stress sales. That can change over the course of the year. We'll add supply to the system. I don't think it will be significant enough to really change the trajectory of the market, but I believe that will prevent prices from rising anytime soon. And I think that the soft performance will continue for the next few months. And I think that the spring will be okay, but not great. That's the way to look at the situation. And remember, we are going through a situation in which prices and activity went up dramatically in 2 years. What we're seeing now is a reset, and it's very healthy. And I can tell you that the fact that sales are stable and prices are stable now is amazing. Tells you how strong this market is, how strong the fundamentals are. This year alone, we are getting 700,000 people into this country between new immigrants, non-permanent residents, students, and 150,000 people from Ukraine on a 3-year visa. Another 400,000 coming. None of them carry their house on their back. So we have to realize that the level of demand is very, very strong and will continue to be strong. And supply will be a major issue. We are now going through a reset period, but it doesn't mean that this market is weak. This market is extremely strong. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of projects are being canceled or delayed because of the cost of construction, higher interest rates, especially purpose-built rental, being delayed, canceled, in a very significant way. So a year or 2 years from now, when we wake up and we need those units, they will not be there. You don't have to be an economist to predict what will happen. So this market is strong. And therefore, I totally agree again, Andy, that, and I met Mr. Ford just early this week in an event. I decided, and I chatted with him about it. I've never seen, without getting into politics here, I'm just telling you, I've never seen a government understanding the supply issue more than this government. This is the most significant change to housing policy in generations, in my opinion. Now, are they going to implement it? I sure hope so. And that's the point that I made. I said, it's easy to say, do it. Do it. Because without this, nobody will be able to afford to live in this city. I will stop here and see if we have a time for discussion.
Ben, Ben, what about immigration? In a time like this, when we still have such tight supply, are we inadvertently creating this massive pent-up demand? I mean, I'm a huge supporter of immigration. We need it, certainly in the long term for fundamental economic growth. But in this period, you know, it's going to take a while for the new government policy to turn that ship around and cause some supply change in the housing market. And that could take at least a couple of years, might be 2025 or beyond. And yet here the federal government is piling on 500,000 a year. And I'm hugely, again, supportive of their change in skilled trades and an economic priority bringing in new immigrants. But are we loading it up inadvertently when, in fact, we might be and should be maybe cutting it back a bit in this period? Or is that what's your thought on that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So first of all, we have to understand that a few things are happening here. As I told you, I think in our previous conversation when we discussed immigration, is that we got in 2021 roughly 401,000 new immigrants, and 70% of them came from Canada. What I mean came from Canada, it means that they were students and their visa expired, and the Canadian government said, while you wait, why don't you apply? And my sources in the government are telling me they would like to see this in the future, namely more people arriving to Canada from Canada. You educate them here, you keep them here. Makes sense. Let me ask you one question, Andy. How many construction workers were out of those 401,000 new immigrants? Basically zero.
Oh, very small. Very small.
How many nurses? Very small. So first of all, before talking numbers, we have to talk about the composition. Namely, maybe we have to change the point system in a way that is a bit more consistent with what we need. And I think that can be done. That's one thing. Second, it's less the number, it's more the distribution. Most of them go to Vancouver and Toronto. If you provide incentives, taxation, housing, all kinds of other things to send them to the east, to the west, to the ferries, to make sure that it's more evenly distributed, I think then you won't have this pressure that you see in Toronto. We need those numbers, otherwise our population will go down. I suggest distribution is the way. Provide incentives to go elsewhere and provide economic activity over there in other cities, in other regions, as opposed to just Toronto and Vancouver. Because if you continue to go to Toronto and Vancouver, eventually we'll reach a point where you cannot attract them anymore because it's simply too expensive to live in those cities. Right. They will not come. They will not be lining up. So it's going to be counterproductive. We have to have a policy, not in terms of numbers, but in terms of the infrastructure to get them and make sure that they have good life here. And part of this infrastructure is allocation and provide incentives to go to other provinces and other cities. That's the way I see it.
And clearly, if we have a target now from the provincial government of 150,000 units a year, I have to look back at the data. I doubt we've ever topped, I think it's 88,000 was
I saw.
Built. How the hell are we going to build them all?
Yeah, when I saw that, I told him good luck with that. You know, it's not going to happen because it's easy to write a number on a piece of paper. Easy. Everybody can do that. The industry does not have the capacity to do so without labor, without trade, without easing and providing incentives. We need to rethink incentives to developers in a big way.
Another thought, Ben, is I agree with you on the trigger rate issue. I think that that'll be managed by the banks and the individuals, and that it won't be a significant stress. It'll be a small proportion that may lead to some increase in supply on the resale side, but it'd be very modest. But the one that is of underlying concern is the one that we have very limited knowledge on, and that's the assignments of existing high-rise condo. There's 96,000 condo units under construction and about 36,000 to be delivered in 2023. And there's this underlying swell of assignments. It's investor driven. It was an investor driven market. How serious an issue do you think this is, or do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, I think it is a serious issue. I think that it's something that will slow down activity. I do believe that the investors market will slow down, and that will make the situation even worse for the rental market. But the rental market is on fire, and we're not building enough. We all know that, and that will continue to be the case. Listen, before the crisis, we estimated with a study that I did with Urban Nation and Terranet that 1/3 of investors in the GTA are in negative cash flow. And we did some focus groups with them to understand why they're doing it. And they said, we know that we are in negative cash flow. That's not our goal. The goal is either capital appreciation and that was the most common answer. I have a 10-year-old son. I want this son to have a chance to live in Toronto 10 years from now. Therefore, I'm buying it now. It's almost a form of gifting. So it's not about economics. It's not about cash flow. However, that was before COVID. Now you have a situation in which rent went up, which is fine, but interest rates went up much higher. The cost of owning is now much, much higher than the cost of renting, much, much higher. There was a huge increase. So I suspect that I don't know if they will be selling, but I don't know if they will be buying as much. And when I tell developers that have new initiatives, I said it will not be as easy to sell. Depends, of course, on the product. It will not be as easy to sell as it used to be because you will have less investors. It doesn't mean that it will be a weak market. It simply will not be a crazy market. I think that's the way to look at it.
And absorptions will take longer. It'll take longer than we have been used to, or at least we've been spoiled on the 70% test for financing and sell a building out in matters of weeks. It's now going to be more, let's say, traditional. It'll take longer.
Exactly. What we witnessed over the past few years was not normal. It's not normal.
Let me ask you about my latest campaign, and that's.
I'm with you. Stress test.
Should it be suspended or should it be modified? It is a crushing blow to our industry today, where I've got to qualify someone at 8%. It's almost feels like piling on, and particularly if we think we're going into a recession, which maybe, as you point out, chances are it's relatively mild. But that stress test is just inappropriate right now. It doesn't make sense.
When they came up with the stress test, I was very vocal about it. I said, I'm fine with it as long as it is linked to market interest rates. It doesn't make any sense to have a 200 basis points stress test on 1% interest and 7% interest. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You cannot use the same spread. You have to adjust it based on where the market is. And they are basically saying that they're going to review it once a year. We are putting a lot of pressure on them. I'm not saying cancel it, but I'm saying adjust it to reflect where the market is. Yes. And I think that there are many ways of doing it, because the way it is now, it just doesn't make much sense to me, quite frankly. And what the issue is that people will go to alternative lenders and pay even higher interest rates. So you increase the risk in the market by doing so. Another factor that we have to realize, one of the reasons why so many people are now stuck with variable rates mortgages that will be adjusting very, very quickly, is because of the fact that for a period of time, and you know that better than anybody else, passing the stress test for variable was much easier than doing the fixed. So everybody moved to variable.
Yeah.
So we reach a point where 60-70% of originations were variable. And now those people are seeing this huge increase in interest rates. So I think that in a twisted way, that the stress test raised the risk in the market by pushing too many people to variables. And I think that if we don't change it, it will shift people to alternative lenders, which I don't think is the solution to the crisis.
That's very true. The alternative lender starts to look very attractive, where I don't have to apply the stress test, and that's
Exactly.
not the intent. In looking forward, you pointed out quite correctly. We played it forward from the pandemic, buying forward. We bought demand forward into the pandemic period. And as we enter now into 23, this period of adjustment of a more quiet time, but 700,000 including the Ukrainian refugee and another.
By the way, they are not considered to be refugees. It's different status. It's a 3-year visa, so they can get housing and everything else, and rental and everything.
Awesome.
Yeah.
But are we not setting ourselves up at this moment for literally an explosion of pent-up demand that in 24, as rates begin to come off, and it's like it's almost, I say to some clients, we'll thrive in 25, but are we setting ourselves up to blow the roof off this market again when rates stabilize and this pent-up demand starts to move back into the scene?
Yes, that's the point that I was making. I think that yes, the risk is first of all for the rental market. Clearly, we are not building now, so the rental market will continue to be on fire. But that will be translated in 2024, 2025 to too much demand, not enough supply. And as you said, all those policies will take time to cook. So so you'll have a period in which you create so much demand, and you're not building enough. And the only question mark is how much unit sales you will get from the resale market. To what extent this number will rise to bring the market to source of equilibrium. That's why I think that what we are going through now is an adjustment or reallocation of activity over time. Don't confuse this with a weak market. This market is not weak. The fundamentals of this market are extremely strong, and they will be strong in the future. We're just going through an adjustment because of crazy 2 years in COVID.
I'm going to turn it back to Chris as we near the end of our time frame, because there may be other questions out there. And I just want to say how much we appreciate your participation in our CIBC Summit Series. This is our final one for the year. It's been a tremendous success, and you've been an important part of that success. And we really enjoy your commentary. You're forthright, you're prescient and right on, and we really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
And so back over to you, Chris.
We've had a lot of great, thank you. We've had a lot of great questions coming in, and as the questions were coming in, the two of you were answering them just naturally. Okay. A couple of good ones that I want to touch on before we wrap up, and thank you for staying on. This one I'm going to let both of you sort of jump in on. What aspects of this provincial housing policy may fall away compared to the announcements of intention? So, I mean, we've kind of gone out. What do you think has the risk of maybe falling off the side of the desk from
Andy, I will let you go first, Andy.
Well, the Greenbelt issue is something that is will probably see some fall away. It's being misinterpreted. It is not any different than what happens right now with the Bruce Trail Conservancy and the Nature Conservancy of Canada, where swaps and trades of land are allowed within those jurisdictions, and the same theory was being taken with the Greenbelt, but it's a real lightning rod. So I'm not sure that there are significant lands that within it that will make a real difference, and that may be an area that takes much longer to kind of resolve or in the argument. And then it opens up also the real story or the discussion around municipal financing. I mean, every developer we work with is so concerned about the tax levels from development charges we're now nearly $200,000 a home just before you dig a hole in the ground on taxes. And where does the municipality go? How do they finance infrastructure? How do they find a way to improve transportation networks? This whole thing opens up a real financing issue with the municipality. So there's going to be some give and take here in the way that the province imposes its new policy direction on the municipality, and it's got to revolve in some ways around municipal finance, I think, and that's an area that will be part of the discussion. I'll stop there, Ben.
Yeah, one more thing is the process in which you challenge a decision. Now, quite frankly, it's relatively easy to challenge something and then stop it. You pay $400 and you can challenge a decision, and that's something that can cost or delay supply by 1 year, and everybody can do it. Every third party can do it. As we understand now, the original proposal was to eliminate this option. Now they are reversing it, so that worries me because it slows down the process very much. Overall, I think that municipalities will need a way to raise money, and the only way to do it is to have the federal government, provincial governments, and municipalities together talk to each other, find a way to finance and compensate for the removal of development charges. In my opinion, also HST should go, and that's something that will be compensated by the federal government. We have a housing crisis. Let's deal with it as a crisis, and I think that the federal government has to be part of it.
Very good point.
I think on that, I'm going to bring it home and wrap it up and do our draw. Ben, thank you. We could go on for another 45 minutes here with these questions, but like I said, a lot of them were being answered just organically as you two gentlemen went along.
If they're there and we can answer them after the fact, we will. And I know Ben has participated in that before. If there's specifics, we can address them for people who haven't, we didn't answer.
Very good. So our draw courtesy of CIBC, as always, our first winner is, and CIBC will be reaching out to you. Michael Amelia is our first. And then our next. And I'm going to mess up your last name, but it's Anne Fergiali. I hope I got that. Congratulations, Anne. We are wrapping up our third season of this series. We are planning our fourth. We will be coming out in the new year. I'm lining up, and the team is lining up so many provocative conversations, so many unexpected panelists. I mean, we've had Stephen Pulitz on this series in the last couple of months. Look out for more of that. Look out for a difference and some value to these sessions. We don't plan on starting over and recycling from season one. We are going fresh and wide and coming up with some really great content for everyone here. So thank you. On to our sponsors. Obviously, Ben, CIBC, our title, our industry partner, and our friends, thank you. SR Law, Balcony Bliss, My Design Studio, Sagen, Smart Touch, Next Home, Buzz Home, Build, Orea, Reliance, Westmount Project, and of course, Lianne and the team over at McOuat, thank you. You guys are a great partnership as well, and we're going to just hang on to you for another season and look out for that. So everyone, happy holidays ahead. We steady hand on the tiller, stay the course. We'll see you in the new year with a whole new lineup of amazing and provocative conversation. Thanks so much for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.